it is very much linked to the previous lecture, which was lecture 10. As you remember, in lecture 10 we talked about different aspects that can help us understand a given discourse, and even helps us in analyzing it. One of these aspects, just to remind you of it, socio-cultural aspect, for example, or political aspect as well. There are so many aspects. These aspects that we talked about last time, all these aspects together constitute a system within which each of the components or aspects simultaneously at the same time gives meaning to all the others and gets meaning from them. In other words, though we did talk about almost 6 aspects, but one of them, as I told you, socio-cultural aspect, but still you have to keep in mind that all of them work together as if they are one unit. For example, if we talk about a given class, all of these factors, all of these aspects indeed do work once we want to analyze the scene. We couldn't take one and forget the other. Indeed, the dealing with one leads to the dealing with the rest of them. So all these aspects together constitute a system within which each of the components or aspects simultaneously gives meaning to all the others and gets meaning from them. That is, we have another form of reflexivity. You remember this word, which is very much important. The situation reflects the language, and the language reflects the situation. If I know the situation, I can predict the language that is to be used, or if I know the language used, I can predict what was the situation in which it was used. For example, to remind you again and again, if I speak in a given way, for example, formally, you can guess that we're talking about a formal situation. You can guess, for example, that I'm in a classroom, I'm in a lecture hall. But if I do use another language, which is less formal, you can guess that I'm not in domains like these, in places like these. You might guess that I'm in a street, I'm in a corridor, and so on and so forth. That is, we have another form of reflexivity. Okay. That is, we have another form of reflexivity here as well. For a shorthand, let's call this system the situation network. This system, which comes as a result of dealing of all of the aspects as if they are one unit, or the dealing with one of them leads to the dealing with the rest of them. For a shorthand, let us call this system the situation network. Situations are never completely novel. Situations are never completely novel, because indeed if they were, we wouldn't understand them. Rather, the situations refers to the situations, they are repeated with more or less variation. They are repeated, but we have a little bit variation, يعني a little bit differences, if I can say this, over time. Such repetition, I talked about that last time, but I confirmed talking about it here because I want to show you it's being very important. Such repetition tends to ritualize or habitualize or freeze situations to varying degrees. That is, to cause them to be repeated with less variation. In other words, situations are repeated and repeated and repeated, them to what? To habitualize them, to make them fixed, and as if they are a model that is difficult to be changed. Such repetition. Imagine the old style spelling bee, or the traditional doctor-nurse relation, patient relationships around the hospital bed is the lifeblood out of which institutions such as distinctive types of schools, hospitals, businesses, industries, streets, and so on and so forth, let me say, are created that ensure the repetition and ritualization of the situations that sustain them. In other words, we behave in a certain way if we are in a given situation. We repeat doing the same till it becomes something habitual. Habitual means that is habit. It's a habit. It is something, in other words, fixed. So we can guess it, we can know it because of the repetition. The situation is repeated and repeated and repeated, and for example, the language used in it is repeated and repeated and repeated till we become having a fixed picture, a fixed scene to that situation. Studying the way in which situations produce and reproduce institutions. Institutions such as schools, such as universities, hospitals, and are in turn sustained by them is an important part of discourse analysis. Again, studying the way in which situations produce and reproduce institutions, how the situation creates a given institution and are in turn sustained by them, that situation is so, for example, because of the language used in that place, is an important part of discourse analysis. In other words, in order to analyze a discourse, you have to have some principles. You have to have some fixed principles, some fixed values on which you depend to analyze the discourse. In other words, you see it in a certain way because of your own experience in that field, because of the repetition of the experience, to the degree as if you have a model upon which you judge the discourse and you analyze the discourse. All of the elements in the situation network are like connected threads. They are like threads. If you pull on one, if you deal with one aspect, you get all the others. Of course, I will illustrate that by a practical example. Though discourse analysis usually focuses on the language, which is semiotic, which is one of the aspects that I have just talked about, not only sociocultural aspect. Semiotic is only another aspect, which is the language. We have, as I told you, many aspects, but we deal with them, all of them, as if they are one unit. Dealing with one leads to the dealing of the rest, and this helps us in discourse analysis. All of the elements in the situation network are like connected threads. If you pull on one, you get all the others. Though discourse analysis usually focuses on the language is very much important in discourse, but it can start from any of these aspects, the aspects that we mentioned in the previous lecture, like sociocultural aspects, semiotic aspects, for example. It can start from any of these aspects of a situation and will, in the end, get right back to all the others. Now, I will give you a practical example to show you what I mean by dealing with all of the aspects as if they are one unit, or dealing with one of them leads to the dealing of the rest. This helps us in dealing with any discourse in order to analyze it, because we deal with it as if it is a system that has different parts, elements, and we approach it having in mind these aspects that we have to consider once we start analyzing that discourse. Now, let me of course refers to G, give some brief examples of how all the aspects in the situation network are integrally intertwined, means integrated, means merged with one another. Consider, for example, a small seminar room with a circular table in it. We have a room and we have a circular table and a blackboard on all sides. We have blackboards in order to write. The room has a front and back. When a teacher is standing at the front addressing students, what gives the room? Now, it is a material thing, the room. A front and a back, meanings and values. So we have something material, and we have meanings and values that we agree to use. We agree to give to something. What gives the room a material thing, a front and a back, اللي هو meanings and values, is indeed a socio-culturally distinctive activity. يعني a given activity in that room, socio-culturally distinctive activity, teaching of a certain sort, teaching something of a certain type, which some culture engage in and others do not. Some cultures do have it, other culture do not have it, so we do talk about culture to help us understand a given situation, in other words, a given discourse in the future. Where some cultures engage in and others do not, an activity realized through socio-culturally distinctive forms of language and certain sorts of socio-cultural knowledge. So socio-cultural knowledge, attitudes and identities. The language is important, the material which is the room is also important, but something which could be classified as socio-cultural is also important to make us judge what is that and what is that. So all of these aspects are working together. Furthermore, the front-back dimension of the room reflects the traditional political elements of teachers. As you remember, one of the aspects we talked about last lecture, lecture 10, is political aspect. Now, what is the political aspect in such a situation? It is the relation between the teacher and his students. The teacher is superior, the students are inferior, if I can put it this way. So, or authority. The teacher has the authority and the students do not. So I'm talking about something political. Front-back dimension of the room reflects the traditional political elements of teachers as authorities and the students as superviant. Thus, the room, something material, the activity, the talk, the language used, socio-cultural identities, and political relations student-teacher all mean together giving and taking meaning from each other. That's all for today. I hope we have seen something practical. You can also refer to what I have just summarized, and thank you so much. Thank you.